I caught my sister and fiance in bed 1 month before our wedding. 6 months later, she gave birth to his child. Be a grown-up and watch your niece. She screamed, then abandoned her daughter on my doorstep. I called the police. Now my entire family says I'm the villain. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. When I was 29, my life felt like a beautifully illustrated book I had written myself. I was engaged to a man named Walter. He was everything a young woman in love could dream of. He worked in construction, and I loved the way he'd come home smelling of sawdust and sunshine, his hands calloused but gentle. He was handsome, of course, but it was his easy smile and the way he'd listen, truly listen, when I spoke that made me fall for him. We had been together for 3 years, and our future felt as solid and real as the old oak tree in my backyard. Our wedding was just a few months away. I remember so many evenings spent at our little kitchen table, the air filled with the scent of dinner and the faint, papery smell of wedding brochures. The house itself was my pride and joy, a charming 2-story place my grandparents had left me. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was my history, the most significant part of my inheritance, and I was so excited to fill its rooms with a new generation of love. One night, we were debating napkin colors. I wanted a soft sage green, he was holding out for a classic ivory. Green is for gardens, Carol, not for wiping your mouth, he teased, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that made my heart flutter. It's elegant, Walter. It's earthy and romantic, I argued back, laughing. Ivory is safe. He leaned across the table and took my hand. Okay, you win. Sage green it is. As long as you promise me the cake is chocolate. Deal, I said, my heart swelling. This was us. Easy, happy, a team. Our little team of 2 often became a trio, thanks to my sister, Brenda. For years my senior, Brenda was my opposite in almost every way. Where I was quiet and content with a book, she was the life of the party, her laughter filling every room she entered. She was beautiful, vibrant, and had a magnetic energy that drew people in. For most of my life, she was my North Star, my best friend. When I introduced her to Walter, they hit it off immediately. She threw her arms around him and declared, "Well, it's about time my little sister found someone who can handle her." Walter just laughed and hugged her back. From that day on, she was a constant, welcome presence in our lives. She'd drop by unannounced on a Friday night with a bottle of wine and a pizza. The 3 of us would sit on the back porch, talking for hours. I loved it. I saw it as the ultimate blessing, the 2 people I loved most in the world, loving each other too. Brenda and Walter developed their own special rapport. He'd tease her about her terrible taste in music, she'd make fun of his obsession with football. It all seemed so harmless, so fun. You 2 are ridiculous, I'd say, smiling as they bickered playfully over the remote control. He's like the annoying brother I never had, Brenda would reply, throwing a couch cushion at him. Looking back, I can see the moments that should have made me pause. A glance between them that lasted a second too long. An inside joke I wasn't a part of. One afternoon, Brenda came over to help us assemble a new bookshelf. I went to the kitchen to get us some lemonade, and when I came back, they were standing very close together in the hallway, their voices low. They sprang apart when they saw me, a little too quickly. Just deciding where to put this thing, Walter said, his voice a little strained. Brenda just smiled, a bright, brittle thing that didn't quite reach her eyes. I brushed it off. It was nothing. It was Brenda and Walter, just being themselves. I was too busy, too happy, too deeply in love with the perfect picture I had painted to ever imagine that the artists themselves were smearing the colors behind my back. The first signs of trouble are always so easy to dismiss. You explain them away, you rationalize, you tell yourself you're being paranoid. That's what I did. The shift began subtly, a quiet changing of the emotional seasons, about 3 months before the wedding. Walter, who had always been so present and attentive, started to become distant. The late nights at work became more frequent. "It's a big project, hon, a lot of pressure to finish on time," he'd say, shrugging off his boots by the door. I wanted to be the supportive, understanding fiancé, so I'd have his dinner waiting, no matter how late he came home. But one night, he came in well after midnight. I'd made his favorite, chicken parmesan, and the kitchen was filled with the warm, comforting smell of garlic and cheese. He walked in, dropped his keys on the counter, and barely glanced at the meal I'd set out. "I'm beat, Carol. I'm just gonna shower and go to bed." "But I made your favorite," I said, my voice smaller than I intended. "I'm not hungry," he snapped, his voice sharp. "Just put it in the fridge." He walked away, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with 2 plates of food and a growing sense of unease. Then there was Brenda. Our standing Saturday morning coffee date, a tradition that had survived high school, college, and our 20s, suddenly became conditional. "Hey, so sorry, have to cancel this week." Feeling under the weather, she texted one Friday night. The next week, it was, ugh, got roped into helping a friend move. "Rain check?" I called her one afternoon, just to chat. "Hey, you," I said when she answered. "I feel like I haven't talked to you in forever." "Oh, she said, her voice sounding distant and distracted. "Just been super busy. Life, you know?" There were long, awkward pauses in the conversation. It felt like talking to a stranger, not the sister who knew all my secrets. The real, undeniable crack appeared one evening when I was doing laundry. I was emptying the pockets of Walter's work jeans when my fingers closed around a small, folded piece of paper. It was a receipt. Not from a hardware store or a lunch spot, but from a place called the Willow Creek Inn, a cozy, romantic little bar on the other side of town. It was dated from the previous Tuesday, a night he had told me he was working late. The receipt was for 2 glasses of expensive wine. My hands started to tremble. It could be anything, I told myself. A business meeting. A drink with a coworker. But my gut, that deep, instinctual part of me, knew better. I shoved the receipt back in my pocket, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. I didn't confront him. I was too afraid. Afraid that if I pulled on this one loose thread, my entire, beautiful world would unravel. So I stayed silent, and I let the poison of suspicion seep into my veins, a little more each day. It was a Thursday, bathed in the impossibly bright sunshine of late spring. The date was burned into my memory, May 12th, exactly 1 month until I was supposed to walk down the aisle. I had taken the afternoon off from the library, a little gift to myself to finalize the flower arrangements for the wedding. The meeting with the florist went wonderfully. I left her shop with the scent of lilies and roses clinging to my clothes, feeling a renewed sense of excitement that had been missing for weeks. Driving home, I rolled the windows down and let the warm air whip through my hair. A song I loved came on the radio, and I sang along, my voice loud and off-key. For that brief, 15-minute drive, everything felt right again. I was just a happy woman, in love, on her way home to her fiancé. I decided I'd surprise him. We could sit on the porch, have a glass of iced tea, and just be together, pushing back the strange fog that had settled between us. As I turned onto our street, I saw Brenda's blue sedan parked a few houses down. It was a little unusual for her to park so far away, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was visiting Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who lived on the corner. I parked in our driveway, grabbing the mail as I walked to the front door. I unlocked it, the familiar click echoing in the sudden quiet of the house. "Walter? Honey, I'm home." I called out, dropping my purse and the mail on the hall table. The silence that answered me was heavy, unnatural. The television was off. There was no sound from the garage. A prickle of unease traced its way down my spine. I walked into the kitchen. A coffee mug sat on the counter, half full. I walked into the living room. His work boots were kicked off near the couch, and his jacket was thrown over the back of the armchair. He was here. He had to be. Walter? I called again, my voice a little louder this time, a little more strained. I started down the hallway that led to our bedroom. With each step, the feeling of dread grew, coiling in my stomach like a cold snake. The bedroom door was closed, but not fully latched. It was open just a crack. And that's when I heard it. Not a loud noise, but a soft, intimate murmur. And then, a laugh. A distinctly female laugh. A laugh I had known my entire life. Brenda's. My body went completely still. It was as if my feet had been nailed to the hardwood floor. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could hear was the frantic, roaring pulse in my ears. It was a moment of pure, terrifying clarity where every little doubt, every late night, every cancelled coffee date coalesced into one monstrous truth. I knew what was behind that door. I knew it with a certainty that was as absolute as the ground beneath my feet. But I had to see it. I had to make it real. With a hand that felt disconnected from my body, I reached out and pushed the door open. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the scene in a cruel, beautiful light. And there they were. My sister and my fiancé. In my bed. In the sanctuary I had created with him under the quilt my grandmother had made. The world didn't just stop. It ceased to exist. All the color, all the sound, all the feeling drained out of me, leaving behind a hollow, ringing void. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't even breathe. I just stood there, a statue in the doorway, and watched my life burn to the ground. In that horrifying, frozen moment, their faces turned toward me. Walter's expression was a grotesque mix of shock and terror. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked like a frightened little boy. Brenda, however. Brenda's reaction was what truly broke me. After the initial flash of panic, her expression hardened into something else. Something that looked unnervingly like defiance. It was a look that said, "The secret's out." The spell of silence was broken by Walter scrambling for his clothes, his movements clumsy and panicked. "Carol, honey, this isn't." "I can explain," he stammered, not daring to look at me. A sound escaped my lips. It was a laugh, but it was a terrible, broken thing, devoid of any humor. "Explain?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "You want to explain this?" "Please, Walter, I'm dying to hear the explanation for why my sister is in our bed a month before our wedding." He just shook his head, pulling on his jeans, his face pale. He couldn't look at me. He couldn't face what he had done. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, grabbing his shirt from the floor. He rushed past me, a coward fleeing the scene of the crime, and I heard the front door slam shut behind him. And then it was just the two of us. Me and my sister. Brenda moved with a slow, deliberate grace that infuriated me. She wrapped the bedsheet around her body and stood up, facing me. "Carol, I am so sorry," she said, her voice steady. "Get out of my house," I said, my words low and shaking with a rage that was finally beginning to thaw the ice in my veins. "Just let me explain." "Explain what? How long has this been going on?" I took a step into the room, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "How long have you been sneaking around behind my back, sleeping with my fiancé in my house?" She had the decency to look away. "About 6 months," she said quietly. 6 months. Half a year. The number echoed in the silent room. Half a year of lies. I thought of all the times she had helped me address wedding invitations, the afternoon she'd spent with me trying on bridesmaid dresses, the countless times she had sat at my kitchen table, drinking my coffee, pretending to be my friend, my sister. The betrayal was so immense, so profound, I felt physically ill. "Get your things," I said, my voice a venomous whisper. and get out of my life. I went into the living room, my body on autopilot. I saw the wedding planning binder on the coffee table, filled with fabric swatches and catering menus. With a guttural cry of pure anguish, I grabbed it and hurled it into the empty fireplace. I started pacing, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of pain and fury. I had to dismantle it. I had to erase them, from my life, starting now. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for our reception venue. A cheerful woman answered. "Hello, the Grand Oak Pavilion." My voice was cold and robotic. "Yes, I'm calling to cancel the wedding of Carol Jennings and Walter Price on June 12th. "Oh. I'm so sorry to hear that," the woman said, her professional sympathy grating on my raw nerves. "May I ask the reason?" "The groom," I said, my voice breaking for the first time, was sleeping with the maid of honor. And I hung up. I did the same with the caterer, the florist, the photographer. With each call, it felt like I was methodically tearing down the beautiful life I had built, brick by painful brick. When I was done, I realized Brenda was still there, standing in the hallway, now fully dressed. She had been listening to every call. "There's something else you need to know," she said, her voice barely audible. She wouldn't look at me. She just stared at a spot on the wall behind my head. "I can't possibly imagine what else there could be, Brenda." She took a shaky breath. "I'm pregnant, Carol. I'm 2 months along. It's Walter's." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. It wasn't just an affair. It was permanent. It was a baby. A family. A future that was supposed to be mine, stolen and given to her. I didn't have any more anger left. I just felt empty. A hollowed-out shell. I walked to the front door and held it open. "Leave," I said. And this time, she did. The first few weeks were a blur of numb activity and suffocating grief. My parents were my rock. My mother, Jean, descended on my house like a whirlwind of righteous fury. She packed up every last trace of Walter, boxing up his clothes, his books, his entire existence, and dumping the boxes on his parents' doorstep. "How dare he," she'd mutter, her voice thick with anger as she scrubbed the house clean. And Brenda. I don't even have the words. I have never been so ashamed in my life. My father, a quiet man named Tom, was just as supportive in his own way. He'd just show up, unannounced, with my favorite takeout and sit with me in comfortable silence while I stared at the TV, not really seeing it. He called Brenda and told her not to contact us, that she had brought shame on the family and needed to deal with the mess she had made on her own. The message from my family was clear, they were on my side. Brenda and Walter were outcasts. I clung to that support like a life raft. It was the one solid thing in a world that had turned to water. But life rafts, I learned, can spring leaks. 7 months later, my niece, Audrey, was born. And the tide began to turn. It started with a phone call from my mother. "Carol, honey," she began, her voice tentative. "I know this is hard, but..." I saw a picture of her. Of the baby. Brenda sent it. She's beautiful, Carol. She has your father's nose." "Mom, please don't," I said, a familiar knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I know," she said quickly. "But she's an innocent baby. It's not her fault. She's your niece. She's our first grandchild." That was the line. Our first grandchild. It was the magic phrase that seemed to erase all the sins that had come before it. Slowly, cautiously, my parents started to let Brenda back in. It began with quiet visits to Brenda's new apartment, visits they didn't tell me about at first. Then came the excuses. "We just wanted to see the baby, Carol. It has nothing to do with Brenda and Walter." The final, shattering betrayal happened on Audrey's first birthday. My parents announced they were hosting a small family party. Just cake and ice cream, my mom said, trying to sound casual. And we really, really want you to be there. It's time to start healing, honey. For the family. Against my better judgment, I went. I walked into my parents' house, a place that had always been a haven, and it felt like enemy territory. Brenda was there, holding Audrey on her hip. Walter was standing beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. They looked like a perfect little family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had called me weeks before, whispering words of support, were now cooing over Audrey, handing Brenda brightly wrapped gifts. No one knew what to say to me. I stood awkwardly by the snack table, a stranger at my own family's party. My father came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice low. He then raised his glass of punch. "A toast," he announced to the room. "To family. We've had a rough year, but family is what matters most. And to new beginnings." He looked directly at me as he said it. The message was clear. Get over it. Move on. Be the bigger person. I looked around the room, at all the smiling faces, and I realized they had all moved on without me. They had chosen the new, unbroken family over the broken pieces of my heart. I quietly slipped out the back door, got in my car, and drove away. I was done trying to fit into a picture where I no longer belonged. The years after that birthday party were a lesson in emotional self-preservation. I built a fortress around myself, not out of hate, but out of necessity. My work at the library became my sanctuary. The quiet, the order, the endless stories, they were a balm to my fractured soul. I worked hard, taking on extra projects, organizing community reading programs. My dedication paid off, and a few years later, I was offered a promotion to head of community outreach, which came with a significant and welcome salary increase. For the first time, I felt a sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own. My social life was small but meaningful. I had 2 or 3 incredible friends who had seen me through the worst of it. They never pushed me to get over it. They just listened. I even tried dating. I went out with a nice man named Robert, a history teacher. He was kind and funny, but on our 3rd date, when he casually rested his hand on my back, I flinched. The trust just wasn't there. I realized it wasn't fair to him, or to me, to try to build something new on such broken foundations. A few years later, after my father's health took a turn, my parents made the decision to sell their large family home and move in with me. My house, the one from my grandparents, had plenty of space, and it seemed like the most logical solution. But their presence brought the past back into my home in a way I couldn't escape. They immediately fell into the role of doting grandparents, and my house became the unofficial daycare center for Audrey. I sat them down in my living room before the arrangement was finalized. "We need to set some ground rules," I said, my voice steady. "You are welcome to have Audrey here. I understand your relationship with her is important to you. But I will not be a part of it. When she is here, I will be in my office or my bedroom. We will not be one big, happy family under this roof. This is my house, and that is my non-negotiable boundary." They agreed, though my mother's disappointed sigh was loud enough to fill the room. And so began our strange, compartmentalized life. I learned Brenda's drop-off and pick-up times and made sure to be out of sight. I'd be in my office, trying to read, and I'd hear the sound of cartoons and a little girl's laughter floating up from the living room. It was a constant, painful reminder of the life I was supposed to have. This new reality also forced me to think about the future in a practical, if grim, way. I scheduled an appointment with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Mrs. Davis. "I need to update my will," I told her, sitting across from her polished mahogany desk. "I want to make it absolutely, legally airtight. This house, my inheritance, is to be left to a specific charity. Under no circumstances is my sister, Brenda, or her family to have any claim to it." Mrs. Davis just nodded, her expression unreadable, and made the necessary notes. It was a cold, necessary act of protecting what was mine. My life was quiet, it was lonely at times, but it was orderly. And I intended to keep it that way. Last Tuesday was a perfect late summer day. It was my scheduled day off, and I had been looking forward to it all week. My parents had left at the crack of dawn, driving a few towns over to visit old friends, the Millers. They were staying overnight, which meant I had the house, and the glorious silence that came with it, all to myself. I spent the morning in my garden, my hands buried in the cool, dark earth, pulling weeds and trimming back the lavender bushes. The sun was warm on my back, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the big oak tree, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of profound peace. I made myself a tall glass of iced tea and was about to settle onto the porch swing with a new novel when I heard the sound of a car engine. I glanced up and my entire body tensed. Brenda's silver minivan was pulling into my driveway. A wave of hot, unwelcome adrenaline washed over me. This was wrong. She never came on Tuesdays. This was not part of the carefully constructed, unspoken schedule that kept our lives from colliding. I stood up slowly, wiping my damp hands on my jeans, my peaceful morning evaporating like mist. She got out of the car, already talking on her phone, her expression a mask of frantic energy. She gestured wildly with one hand as she spoke. She rushed around to the passenger side, opened the door, and my heart sank as my 6-year-old niece, Audrey, hopped out onto the driveway. Brenda finally ended her call, shoving the phone into her purse. She hurried toward me, her face flushed. "Carol!" "Oh, thank God you're here," she said, her voice high and strained. "Listen, I am in a massive jam. A client just called an emergency meeting, a huge deadline got moved up, and I absolutely have to go back to the office. I tried calling Mom and Dad, but their phones are going straight to voicemail. Can they watch Audrey for just a couple of hours?" I crossed my arms over my chest, a familiar defensive posture. I felt the old walls inside me, the ones I had so painstakingly built, snap back into place. My voice, when I spoke, was flat and devoid of any warmth. "They're not here," I said. "They went to the Millers. They won't be back until tomorrow morning." The frantic look in Brenda's eyes flickered. For a split second, I saw pure panic. But it was quickly replaced by something else, something I recognized all too well: calculation. Her eyes darted from me to Audrey, then back to me. A bright, artificial smile spread across her lips. "Oh," she said, her voice turning syrupy sweet. "Well, that's okay then. You can watch her, right? I mean, you're home anyway. It would be a lifesaver, Carol. I'm desperate." The peaceful sanctuary of my home had just been breached. I stared at my sister, at the practiced, pleading look on her face. A decade of buried resentment churned in my gut. All those years of avoiding her, of rearranging my life to keep her at a distance, and here she was, standing on my lawn, trying to force her way back in through the side door of convenience. "No, Brenda," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a slammed door. Her fake smile faltered. She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "What? What do you mean, no?" "I mean no," I repeated, my voice level. "I am not going to watch her. You need to make other arrangements." "Other arrangements?" she said, her voice rising. "Carol, I just told you, this is an emergency. I don't have time to make other arrangements. Come on, don't be like this. It's just for a few hours. She's your niece." She was using the word niece like a key, expecting it to unlock some hidden door of familial obligation in me. She didn't understand that door had been bricked over years ago. "My plans for the day do not include babysitting," I said, my tone hardening. "The answer is no." Her expression shifted from pleading to outright anger. "You've got to be kidding me. After all this time, you're still holding on to that ancient history? It was over 10 years ago, Carol. For God's sake, grow up." "This isn't about that," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "I am simply telling you that I am not available. You should have had a backup plan. You're my sister. You're supposed to be the backup plan, she shot back, her voice practically a shriek. Audrey, who had been quietly examining a line of ants on the pavement, looked up, her little face suddenly wary. Well, I'm not, I said, my resolve hardening with every word she threw at me. I would not be guilt. I would not be manipulated. You need to leave, Brenda. We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. The air crackled with a decade of unspoken anger and resentment. She glared at me, her chest heaving, searching my face for any sign of weakness. She found none. With a sound of pure disgust, she threw her hands in the air. Fine, she spat. Fine. Be a cold, selfish witch. See if I care. She spun around, stomped back to her minivan, and yanked the driver's side door open. I watched her go, a bitter mix of relief and exhaustion washing over me. I had held the line. I had protected my peace. I turned and walked back into the house, the slam of her car door echoing behind me. I locked the front door, slid the deadbolt into place, and leaned against it, my eyes closed. I thought it was over. I stood with my back against the door for a full minute, just breathing. The confrontation had left me shaky, my heart pounding with leftover adrenaline. I walked into the kitchen, my sanctuary, and poured myself a glass of cold water. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the glass to my lips. I took a long, slow drink, trying to wash away the bitter taste of the encounter. From the kitchen window, I had a clear view of the driveway and the street beyond. I watched as Brenda sat in her minivan for what felt like a long time. She wasn't moving. I could see the silhouette of her head, and it looked like she was on her phone. Good, I thought. She's calling someone else. Maybe Walter. Maybe a friend. Problem solved. Finally, the minivan's engine roared to life. I watched as she backed out of the driveway, a little too quickly, and sped down the street, disappearing around the corner. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The relief was immense. The crisis had been averted. My quiet, peaceful day was my own again. I rinsed my glass and was about to head back out to my garden to reclaim my morning when the doorbell rang. The sharp, piercing chime cut through the silence of the house and made me jump. My first thought was that Brenda had forgotten her purse or her phone. Annoyance pricked at me. My second, more cynical thought was that she'd come back for round 2 of our argument. Well, I wasn't playing. I decided to ignore it. If I didn't answer, she would eventually give up and leave. The doorbell rang again, a long, insistent press this time. I stood motionless in my kitchen, my jaw tight. Go away, Brenda. Then, a small, hesitant voice filtered through the door. Aunt Carol? Are you in there? My blood turned to ice. It was Audrey's voice. I flew to the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs. I peered through the peephole, praying I was wrong. But I wasn't. Standing on my porch, looking small and lost, was my 6-year-old niece, Audrey. She was clutching the straps of her little pink backpack with both hands, her eyes wide and uncertain. I fumbled with the locks, my fingers suddenly clumsy, and pulled the door open. Audrey? Honey, what are you doing? Where's your mommy? She looked up at me, her lower lip trembling just a little. Mommy had to go back to work, she said, reciting the words as if she had been coached. She said you would look after me. I stared at her, then looked frantically up and down the street. It was completely empty. Brenda's car was gone. The horrifying reality of the situation crashed down on me. Brenda hadn't forgotten anything. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate, calculated act. She had driven down the street, waited until she thought I wouldn't be watching, circled back, and deposited her daughter on my doorstep like a package before speeding off. She had taken my no and thrown it back in my face. She had used her own child, my innocent niece, as a pawn to win a battle I didn't even want to fight. The sheer, monstrous selfishness of it took my breath away. This wasn't just a betrayal anymore. This was something far, far worse. For a moment, all I could do was stare at the small child on my doorstep. My fury at Brenda was a roaring inferno in my chest, but looking at Audrey's confused face, I knew my first responsibility was to her. She was the victim here, even more than I was. "Okay, sweetie," I said, forcing my voice to be calm and gentle. "It's all right. Why don't you come inside for a little bit?" She nodded and stepped into the house. I led her to the living room and sat her on the couch. I felt a pang of something sharp and painful as I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. She had Walter's eyes, but she had my grandmother's chin. She was family, whether I liked it or not. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" I asked. She shook her head. "Mommy said to be good." "I'm sure you will be," I said softly. I went to the kitchen, got her a juice box and a small bowl of animal crackers, and put on a cartoon channel. As soon as she was distracted, her eyes glued to the screen, I retreated to my office and closed the door. The calm I had shown Audrey evaporated. My hands were perfectly steady now, not with fear, but with a cold, hard rage. I pulled out my phone and dialed Brenda's number. She picked up on the third ring, her voice cloyingly cheerful. "Hello?" "Brenda," I said. My voice was quiet, but it was edged with steel. "You have 1 minute to explain why your daughter is in my house." I heard her let out a little laugh. "Oh, good, you found her. I knew you wouldn't just leave her on the porch. You're a lifesaver, Carol, seriously. I owe you big time." The utter lack of remorse, the smug triumph in her voice, it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. "Listen to me, and listen very carefully," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This is not a game. You did not ask me to babysit. You abandoned your 6-year-old child on my property after I explicitly told you I would not be responsible for her. What you did was reckless, it was cruel, and it was illegal." "Oh, for goodness sake, don't be so dramatic," she scoffed. "She's perfectly safe. She's with her aunt." "She is with a person who did not consent to this," I snapped back. "And that person is about to make a phone call. So here are your options. You can turn your car around right now and come back to get your daughter. Or my very next call is to the police department. I will tell them a child has been abandoned at my home. I'll let you explain your work emergency to them and to Child Protective Services. I imagine a stunt like this could have serious repercussions for your custody agreement, especially if you and Walter ever get a divorce." The line went dead silent. The only sound was her sharp intake of breath. You wouldn't do that," she stammered, the confidence gone from her voice. "Wouldn't I?" I said, my voice like ice. "After everything you've done to me, do you really think I have any goodwill left for you? You used your own daughter to try and hurt me, Brenda. You have no idea what I'm capable of. You have 30 minutes to get here. The clock started the second you drove away." I didn't wait for a reply. I hung up the phone. If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below. It lets me know you've given me a like, and that you're here with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement and means the world to me. So please, comment the number 1 and listen to what happened next. I walked out of my office and stood in the hallway, my arms crossed, watching the clock on the wall. The 25 minutes that followed were the longest of my life. I could hear the tinny sound of cartoons from the living room, a bizarrely cheerful soundtrack to the tense drama that was about to unfold. Exactly 26 minutes after I had hung up, Brenda's minivan screeched into my driveway. She slammed the car door and stormed toward the house, her face a thundercloud of fury. I opened the front door before she even had a chance to ring the bell. We stood facing each other on the porch, two generals on a battlefield. "Where is she?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I didn't say a word. I just jerked my head toward the living room. She pushed past me, her shoulder brushing mine roughly. She marched into the living room, where Audrey was sitting on the floor, captivated by the cartoon. "Audrey, get your backpack. We're leaving. Now." Audrey looked up, her face a mixture of surprise and fear at her mother's harsh tone. She scrambled to her feet and gathered her things. Brenda grabbed her by the arm, a little too forcefully, and practically dragged her toward the door. She didn't say thank you. She didn't apologize. She didn't say a single word to me. As she buckled a now sniffling Audrey into her car seat, she shot me a look over the roof of the car. It was a look of pure, undiluted hatred. I met her gaze without flinching and stood there in the doorway until her car disappeared down the street. The next evening, my parents returned. They were in high spirits, chattering about their trip and the friends they'd seen. I waited until they had unpacked and settled in with a cup of coffee before I told them what had happened. I recounted the events of the previous day calmly and factually, leaving out none of the details. I expected shock. I expected outrage on my behalf. I expected them, finally, to see Brenda for who she truly was. What I got was a cold, stony silence. My mother, Jean, was the first to speak. She placed her coffee cup down with a sharp click. "You threatened to call the police?" she asked, her voice tight with disbelief and disapproval. "On your own sister, Carol?" I was flabbergasted. "Mom, she abandoned her 6-year-old child on my doorstep. After I told her no. What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to have a heart," my father, Tom, boomed, his face turning red. "You were supposed to watch your niece. My granddaughter. Brenda called us this morning, absolutely hysterical. She was sobbing. She told us she had a critical emergency at work and you were so cruel to her, so cold. She had to leave a career-defining meeting because of you. She could have been fired. That's a lie." I cried out, my voice rising in frustration. "There was no meeting. She did it to manipulate me, to punish me for saying no. Can't you see that?" "What I see," my mother said, her voice dripping with disappointment that felt sharper than any anger, "is a daughter whose heart has been poisoned by bitterness. All these years, and you still haven't forgiven her. You hold on to your pain like a precious shield. Why must you always be so dramatic, so difficult? Your sister made a mistake, and your first instinct was to try and ruin her life." They went on, a tag team of accusations and judgment. I was selfish. I was unforgiving. I was cruel. They dissected my every action, while Brenda's were excused as the desperate measures of a stressed-out working mother. I tried to argue, to defend myself, but it was like shouting into a hurricane. My words were just swept away. They weren't listening. They had already picked their side, and once again, it wasn't mine. Finally, exhausted and heartbroken, I just stood up. "I'm done," I said, and walked out of the room, leaving them sitting in a cloud of their righteous indignation. The assault didn't stop with my parents. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of notifications on my phone. Brenda, it seemed, had launched a full-scale public relations campaign against me. I had text messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, telling me they were so disappointed in my behavior. Her friends had taken to social media. One of them, a woman named Sherry, had sent me a long, rambling message calling me a vindictive, bitter spinster who was jealous of my sister's happy family. It was a coordinated attack, designed to isolate and shame me. I called my brother, Mark, who lived in a different state and had always managed to stay somewhat neutral. I told him the whole story, desperate for an ally. "Wow," he said after a long pause. "She really did that? Left Audrey on the doorstep?" "Yes," I said, relieved. "See? It's insane. Yeah, that's not good, he said, but then he hesitated. But, I mean, did you have to threaten to call the cops, Carol? That feels a little extreme. Couldn't you have just watched her and then had it out with Brenda later? You know, to keep the peace? Keep the peace. That phrase again. It felt like my entire life had been about me sacrificing my own peace for the sake of everyone else's. My closest friends were more supportive. You did nothing wrong, my best friend, Sarah, told me over coffee. She crossed a line. A massive one. You have every right to defend your boundaries, and frankly, I'm proud of you for doing it. But the conflicting opinions swirled in my head, making me question everything. For years, I had been the victim, the one who was wronged. My pain was my justification for the walls I had built. But now, they were painting me as the villain. The cold-hearted aunt. The unforgiving sister. Was I? Was it cruel to refuse to help, even when the person asking was the one who had shattered your life? Does there come a point where self-preservation starts to look like selfishness? I've gone over it 1,000 times in my mind. The sight of Audrey on the porch. The fury in Brenda's eyes. The disappointment on my parents' faces. I acted to protect myself, to enforce a boundary that had been violently disregarded. But in doing so, I created a war. And so, after all is said and done, I'm left with this one nagging question. I've told you my side of the story. I've laid my heart bare, with all its scars and calluses. And now I need to ask you, the people who have so kindly listened. You tell me, was I the idiot here?